Hello, and welcome to this episode of Mining Matters, a part of the In Dialogue series hosted by the Non-Fuel Minerals and Mining Research Team, led by Dr. Rajesh Chadha at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, New Delhi. We invite experts from India and abroad to discuss how India's mining sector can become a catalyst for economic growth and development, ensuring fair and sustainable mining practices for the environment and affected communities.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Ganesh Sivamani. I am a research associate at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. I am with the non-fuel minerals and mining team, where we look at how to improve the mining sector for the benefit of the Indian economy and as well as the welfare of local communities. Today in our discussion on mining matters, Mr. Chanakya Chaudhary from Tata Steel is joining us. He is the Vice President of Corporate Services, Tata Steel Limited. And I want to thank you very much for giving your time and joining us today for this discussion. Our main focus today would be on how India's mining sector can become a catalyst for economic growth and development, which ensures fair and sustainable mining practices for the environment and affected communities. Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. To start with, just wanted to ask a bit about your background. You've been in the mining space with Tata Steel and other companies related to Tata for some time. I wanted to ask you a bit about the history of mining that you have seen over the last multiple decades. How have mining operations in India evolved over the last 30 years? There must have been quite a few changes since you began in the raw materials collieries division in Jharia, Dhanbad. So I'd like to hear from you on that, please.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me over for this. And yes, I did start my career in Tata Steel in the coal mines at Jharia. However, I'm not a mining engineer. So I'm a mechanical engineer and I spent the first 5 years there, and then I moved to Jamshedpur and then to Delhi. And that's where, when I moved to Delhi, that's where I think most of the mining policy discussions and what is right for India kind of discussions, what is right for the public sector and private sectors was always discussed, and policies were framed and formulated or modified. And that's where I think I also picked up a lot of details in terms of the policies. Plus, I think as Tata Steel, we were also venturing out of India in the early 2000s, and that gave us the kind of a first-hand account of how mining is done in different parts of the world. And those policies, whether it was in Africa or Australia or Canada or anywhere else where mining we used to engage, we would get insights, and then we shared those insights with Government of India so that those could be used whether by Planning Commission at that time or Niti Aayog now to formulate the policies. When I started from the coal mining there in Jharia, I think coal was always a regulated sector, and it is still a regulated sector to an extent. And I think from the very beginning, coal mining, when I say beginning, means somewhere near the 1970s onward, it has always been a very regulated sector, especially because power was a regulated sector, and most of the coal which is mined in India used to go, and even today goes, for thermal power. Only a small portion is used for coking coal, comes out and used for steel making. That's what metallurgical use is all about. So I think the mining is primarily or predominantly today seen as coal and iron ore, but there are huge number of other minerals and metals which actually come out in mining. Nevertheless, to just restrict myself to coal to start with, I think coal mining also went through a lot of policy interventions and changes. And I remember in the late 90s and post 1991, when the liberalization took place, I think some changes were made in the coal mining policy to have more of allocations connected to the end use plants. And primarily coal was getting used in three end uses: steel, power, and cement. So the allocations started getting made for these three sectors, steel was always there. Actually speaking, even when it got nationalized, steel usage was continued even that time for coal, and those allocations were there. But it opened up post 1991 for these three sectors, and for the next 2 decades, I would say from 90s to 2000s, the whole policy was working on how to ensure allocations with end users, which had a good process of screening committees with the central government chairing it and the respective state governments and the administrative ministries, which is steel, power, and industry, as recommendatory bodies for these sectors. So it went through those processes, and in somewhere in the early 2000, I think the conversation started for should we have an auction of coal. And I am deliberately starting with coal because I think the iron ore per se came much later. Okay. So coal was the one which was always under discussion for auctions and competitive biddings. And a lot of stakeholder commitments and stakeholder engagements were happening with the government and the companies which were actually looking for getting coal. And the first cut for competitive bidding started from coal, and it went through the whole cycle of scams and no transparency in allocations and no revenue sharing or revenue to the state and the center and stuff like that. And then in 2014, after the Supreme Court judgments, the whole thing got into a changeover for auctions. Now, coming to iron ore per se, I think if you look at the trajectory of iron ore prices in the last 100 years, for the first 90 years or 80 odd years, till the beginning of 2000, it was a very, very stable commodity across the world. It's available in abundance. Requirements are there. Demands go up and down, but the supplies are never in short supply. So it never had a problem. Early 2000, I think China started opening up for major steel expansions because of the Commonwealth. For the games, I think the Olympics, which was scheduled there possibly in 2010, and there was a huge steel capacity which got set up and instituted in China. And then they had a huge requirement of iron ore, coal, etc. And then coal and iron ore started getting exported from various countries into China, and that's where the prices went up. And suddenly everyone started waking up to higher and higher iron ore prices. Even India was exporting from various parts of the country and so on and so forth. However, as I said, 2014-15 was the watershed year for change of policies. Once the Supreme Court orders came in, then the Government of India also took cognizance of that. This respective state governments also followed suit, and competitive bidding became the only way of allocation of natural resources. And that's the change I think I have seen. If you ask me what has this change given us, it's surely given us the transparency. In the allocation processes are very, very clear, that because it's a two-stage bidding process. It has given, in some way, revenue maximization, because I think the state governments were also looking at revenue shares, and that's where it has led. On the flip side, the competitive advantage which the country has today of the minerals has in some way, I'll not say totally gone away, in some way become more expensive. So whether it is a competitive edge or advantage in India or not is not really clear currently. But let me also add to say that India is a very India is in a very, very unique situation, or uniquely poised, I would say. Not many countries in the world have this situation, where you have the natural resources, which is, let's say, iron ore, coal, bauxite, etc. You have the capital and the technology available for end use, which is steel, aluminum, cement, power. And the best part is that you have the consumers within India. So it's an end-to-end chain. If you compare this with any country, if you look at China and Japan, they will have some raw materials, they have the technology, they don't have the consumers. If you look at Korea and Japan today, most part of the steel they make is exported. 30 to 40% gets exported. If you look at the mining countries like Australia, Brazil, they are mining countries. Why is it that they don't produce steel? For the simple reason they don't have any consumers, or I'll not say any, but many consumers. So the consuming industry or consuming parts are outside Australia and Brazil. So they don't have that kind of population. So I think that way, competitive edge or advantage that we have reduced that, because the moment you go into competitive bidding, it becomes much more expensive at the hands of the lessee or the user. For a steel maker or a aluminum manufacturer or a cement manufacturer, in some way it will be a pass-through. So by the end of the day, the end product, whether it is steel or cement or aluminum, will get more expensive. So I think that's the balancing thing that I wanted to start with.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very interesting summary of, I think, the last few decades of the mining industry. Our team specifically has been working on issues related to auctions, primarily, of course, of iron ore, since that's the bulk of the auctions that have come through. And I think one interesting thing you had mentioned is that India is blessed with the amount of mineral resources we have. I think we produce 70 plus types of mineral resources in India. And many say that our geology is akin to even some parts of Western Australia or Eastern Africa. So with all of this available resources, do you feel like our potential has been fully utilized? Are we there at a position of a mining country like Australia or Brazil, where we are fully taking advantage of the resources we have today? And specifically, have the amendments to MMDR, Mines and Minerals Development Regulation Act 2015, and more recently 2022, are they in the right direction? And I think one particular focus maybe, I could maybe ask you if you can talk a bit about, would be the exploration side, because I think exploration, perhaps sort of bulk minerals, but at least of deep-seated or other critical or strategic minerals, that seems to be lacking, despite having plenty of potential out there in India. So if you could, maybe talk a bit about that, please.
I think the answer is a combination. The answer is, first of all, should we be a mining country like Australia? Because you said like Australia.
Yeah.
Having said that, my answer to that is no. We should not. We should pick up the best of processes and systems that are followed in mining industry, for sure. Whether it is in Australia or Brazil or anywhere else in the world. But should we follow suit what they do? I would say we need to adapt rather than adopt. Okay. And the reason I'm saying is because you have consumers in India. We are a highly populated country. There is a demand in the country. So I don't need to only be a mining country. I need to have enough mining, and I need to have good systems of mining, sustainable mining, which can then produce and give it to the end use industry, which can then be, the products can be used by the consumers. Having said that, coming to the point of modifications or the policy changes which have happened in 2015, and now very recently certain drafts have been issued and stuff like that. Are they in the right direction? Once we have taken a policy decision that we will do competitive bidding, and there are obviously now, once we have run with the competitive bidding for a good amount of 5-7 years, or some states have actually done well on the bidding processes, and if you notice, they have actually regularly been putting up blocks for auction, and there has been a demand, and that's why the bids have gone, premiums have gone very, very high, right? So I think from that perspective, the transparency, the maximization of revenues have all taken shape. Second part is what you just said. What about the exploration part piece? Now, the Government of India decided in the policy that the exploration will be done by us. By us means here by India, right? For which they have the right to do it either themselves or they can ask someone else to do it for them. And some policy changes have even been made in between because some of the explorers or the exploration companies came back and told that it doesn't make sense because if the exploration company doesn't have any right, why would anyone pump in money and do the needful? So they have modified that to the extent possible that anyone's money which gets sucked in gets paid back at a little later. Surely, if you compare it with other countries, this is not in sync. Other countries, like I recall when we were in, I think, South Africa or somewhere, or even we went to Indaba and some other PIDACs. So they used to always talk about the junior mining companies and this, the mining companies. And obviously there were some companies which were only into exploration. And exploration always doesn't give you the results that you're looking for. So possibly 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 will give you, and that's where you make your money. However, India has not moved in that direction. Okay, we have tried a certain different model. Now, we've also looked at something called the NMET, which is saying that every 2% or something will be paid for exploration, right? The point is very, very simple. I think it is for the policy makers to review this. Personally, because I belong to Tata Steel, we do exploration of the mineral or the leases which come to us, which is primarily for captive usage, right? And we are comfortable with what we are doing. We do have one company now as a Tata Steel Mining Limited, which has gone into mining and it's also doing commercial mining now. So, but if you really ask me, I think like we are changing, the way we are doing competitive bidding, we should also look at are we on the right track on exploration? Because I think there is a huge opportunity for India to open up exploration in a way which does not, take away the interest of India, but at the same time gives a value to the mining industry.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a point of discussion that many have brought up with regards to the Indian exploration industry, and hopefully that can help, especially in the future when various raw material issues might come up on critical minerals specifically. Some discussion is happening on which are the critical minerals we need for building our solar panels, wind turbines, etc. And I think on that note, if I might shift gears slightly towards that angle of critical minerals and supply chains related to critical minerals and raw materials, what can India do better to make ourselves ready for mining these specific minerals in India, specifically like rare earths, cobalt, maybe lithium? I keep seeing news articles that there might be some potential for lithium in India. How can the government enable these minerals to come out? And not just the minerals, but the processing as well. We don't want to be like a mining country where we send out the minerals for processing. We want the domestic industry to flourish too.
So I think rightly put that it's not only the main minerals that we keep talking about, iron ore, chrome, manganese, and coal and all that, but it's also about these rare earths. And in the past, I think some of these rare earths were also very controlled in terms of, who can get the mining leases and who can mine and who can use and stuff. I think policies on that have also got evolved over a period of time. They have also changed. And I think one thing very clearly Government of India wants is Make in India. I think all our ease of doing businesses, whether it's by the policies in the center or the states, respective states where we operate, there's a huge focus on ease of doing business. And because I think somewhere that whole thought of the Honorable PM is very, very strong of Make in India. And if I have to connect some of this to the target of climate change which Government of India is propagating or formulating, I think every single mineral which we need, whether it's lithium or anything else, for some of the products which will finally get into usage for a sustainable future, makes much more sense today. So any kind of a policy intervention at this stage will only look at how do we make in India. And I think that's where the policies have to be modified.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think again, I'd like to go back to a comment you made on some of your earlier experiences, having seen the mining industries in other countries like in Australia, South Africa, and others. I think one interesting question that many have, at least with respect to Indian mining industry, now more on the environmental and social welfare side, is that it's tended to have some issues on both angles. Either communities being upset about some of the mining work or environment having negative externalities. So are there any learnings we can take from other countries to implement in India that can make the environment better or make it better for the affected communities? And maybe a little bit also on FIMI, the Federation of Indian Mining Industries. They have their sustainable mining initiative. How in line is that with the international good practices on sustainable mining?
So I think first things first is that mining in India primarily happens in the rural part of India, in the hilly terrains. So that's how nature has given it, right? And no mining in the country can sustainably take place if you do not live with the community. I'll not even say engage with the community, because it's not that I go tomorrow morning, do something and come out. You have to be a part of that community. And I think the policy interventions from Government of India have been very, very active and alert on this subject. So if you notice how these policies of interventions and living with the community and taking care of the environment and the community has moved, is tremendous. Earlier we used to have, if it was 2 decades back, it was one public hearing, which also had at times had exemptions available for certain specific reasons. All those have gone away, right? So that means for every kind of public consultation, you have to talk to the people who will get impacted by your project. And it's a very, very, I would say, transparent process now. It gets recorded. It gets presented to the expert appraisal committees, where question answers are kind of seen, whether someone is rigging it or not, you can clearly make out and stuff like that. So I think those have changed to a large extent and for the better. Similarly, there are Gram Sabhas. Earlier, there were no Gram Sabhas. I remember about 10 years back, there were no Gram Sabhas. Today, we have Gram Sabhas for everything that you have to do in the mining space. At times, I feel, are we overdoing it? But at the same time, if I step back and think that it is for some people who may get impacted or exploited, it is, even if you are overdoing it or duplicating it, just go ahead and do it. Because by the end of the day, it's the community which gets impacted, right? Now, what happens when a mine starts operations? How does the ecosystem change, right? So one is that you hear from the horse's mouth in some way as to what is it that they're looking for. And frankly speaking, any of these public consultations, if you sit down very seriously looking at what is the demand and what is the ask, you will find the basic needs not getting fulfilled. They'll ask for schools, they'll ask for health centers, ask for roads, they'll ask for electricity, they'll ask for water. Tell me any of these 4 or 5 items I've counted, would you not like to have them? Would I not like to have them? So as human beings, as fellow citizens, I think somewhere this is missing and this has to be given. Now, who will give it to them? It should be given by the government. It should be given by the industry or the companies which are setting up shop. And it has to be a collaboration. And I think that is where the DMF has helped in some way, the District Mineral Fund. That if you are going and doing mining, you don't put pressure only on the miner to say that, it is your responsibility. There should be a fund created so that by the end of the day, the benefit of that mining can be taken care of, or the advantage can be taken care of by the community at large. Now, that is one part of the story. The second is environmental, as you said, environmental. I think here again, a lot of work government has done in terms of ensuring that the environments are protected. And obviously, when you are mining, you're going to impact the environment adversely. And how can that be, first of all, mitigated? And the second is, how do you create management plans to, in some way have a zero impact, right? If you look at the way the policies have changed, the requirements have changed on the mining companies over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, it's amazing. Today, in some of the mines which we operate, and I can see some of the neighboring mines as well, if you look out for mined out areas, which were, mined out, mineral exhausted, you stand there, you will not realize that these are mined out areas. You will feel these are like virgin areas. And I think the credit goes totally to the policymakers and the mining companies here. Plus, I think government has also been very, very forceful in creating consequence managements, right? You have the NGT. You have, if there are violations, it is taken very, very seriously. It was not so 20 years back. A person who intends to have a violation should think twice, because you have very strict rules today of shutdown of the mining. You have polluter pays principles which are going to be detrimental to you, and so on and so forth. So I think on both sides, government has done well in terms of ensuring that, one is that the policies itself enable a framework which will go in for sustainable mining, which goes in for development around the ecosystem, and also create consequence management in such a way that it's not only creating controls and barriers, but also doing ease of doing business, and at the same time creating consequence management so that if someone doesn't fall in line or doesn't work within the boundary or framework of the policies, the consequences will be strong. The last part of your question was on FIMI and the role of sustainable mining. I think they have an initiative called the SMI, which is one of the initiatives which looks at all possible initiatives of sustainable mining, and we are all members there. Big companies, small companies, mostly are members there, and we learn from each other. We also share our own experiences from within India and outside, and try to see if we can in some way bring in sustainable mining initiatives within the mining space itself.
And from outside, are there any particular learnings you think that India could seek to adopt that would help better preserve ecosystems or help the communities any better? Is there anything outside of India that we can do or follow?
Yeah, so I think that's a regular feature. So I don't want to take one-off kind of a thing, but I still recall in the mid 2000s, so 2006 to 2010, when we used to be scouting for minerals outside India, and we used to go to various countries. One of the things which you used to come back and do is to share, saying that I went to so and so mine and we saw this practice is not in India, we should take it up, and either we do it ourselves or we do it through the policy makers. And I think that continues, because it's not only when I visit, it's a regular feature, because now many Indian companies are also mining outside India.
Yeah.
So it becomes a without even saying, you bring that in.
Okay. And I think mining outside of India is quite useful for securing our own supply chains domestically as well. I know that we have Kabul, for example, which is looking to secure our critical mineral supply chains, especially lithium in South America and Australia. So hopefully they can make some good progress on that. I think I just want to circle back to the original question of our discussion today, and that is kind of an open-ended question. what changes would you like to propose, if any at all, that could help India, the Indian mining sector, move faster and become a catalyst for overall national economic growth and development, both on the economy side and also perhaps on the community development side or environmental protection side?
I think this is a typical issue with all of us in India, that when we change from one policy to the other, we don't, it's not like a surgical strike. We carry a few things of the past and we bring in the new things as well. And there are times when you carry on with both. So it's a bit confusing. And at the same time, it doesn't give the benefit that you're looking for. For example, we moved away from the first come, first serve kind of allocation process in minerals to auctions, right? Now, there are 2-3 things which the auctions have brought out. There will be bidding process. So obviously there will be few parties which will come and bid and outbid each other. And then whatever is the highest bid is selected. And there is a premium or a revenue share model or whatever model you take. The state gets its own revenues out of it, right? Now, do we really have a reason to have royalties? Why should one have royalty beyond the premium or the bid premium that is going to the exchequer, whether state or
double taxation?
So I'm just saying that, should we not have said, okay, this was of yesterday, now today this is a new system?
Right.
We don't do that. Similarly, the NMET, maybe it's a 2% thing. But why should you, once you are doing revenue maximization, then out of that kitty, you use anything for exploration, you use anything for whatever purpose you want. But why do you need to have some of these to continue? Similarly, something called the MDPA. I'm sure you would have heard about this MDPA, which is mine development and production plans and stuff. Now, when this was brought in with a purpose, I think it's high time that government reviews whether that purpose has got served or it has not served. And the purpose was that because there was a huge outcry that there'll be huge shortage of mineral. The moment you go in from normal process of allocation to auction, there will be a disruption. The current operating mines may not be able to continue production. And then sooner than later, you will have a shortage. And hence, to safeguard the interest of everyone, every user, it was said that any new company which takes a mine on through auction, which is already an operating mine, has to produce in the first year 80% of the last production and then ramp up to 100 and so on and so forth.
Right.
Otherwise, if you don't do it, you will have a penalty, right? Now, the auction started somewhere in 2020. We are in 2022. Most of the leases which were expiring in 2020 have changed hands. I would say there are very few mining leases which have not been operating. There are no shortages in the country, whether you take iron ore or coal or whatever. Okay. However, the interesting thing is that whether this MDPA should be there or not should be questioned.
Right.
Because the challenge today is that, how does one, after winning the bid, start operations? It is in the interest of the mining company to start operations as early as possible.
Right.
Why? Because you are bidding so high, your premiums are so high, and if you do not pay attention to the whole cycle time and you get delayed, your performance securities are so high, and if you default 2 or 3 times, you stand to lose the mining block, right? So I think the interest would be to start operations as fast as possible. So there is no chance of someone hoarding, all right, which was there earlier in the first come, first serve, because I just got it. There were no penalties. I could decide when I need it. I will mine. I will start operation, but I'll do it small, carry on mining the way I want it. In today's time, when I'm bidding so high, why will I hoard?
Yeah.
Because I have only negatives to look at when I hoard. So should MDPA be there at all? Then in the latest draft, we also have some restrictions which are being proposed in terms of the area of one company should be holding. Now, I really don't understand why this flip-flop. Frankly speaking, it used to be 10 square kilometers once upon a time in 1957 Act, MMDR, with a provision of relaxation that any company which needed more had to justify and the state had to recommend and center had to approve, was there earlier. When 2015, the Mines Act got amended, it was revised to say that instead of, having one company looking around and all that, the state should have a policy of saying mineral-wise, which mineral do you think, and which made sense to the extent that every mineral is not found in every state of the country. So if I am in Karnataka and I have iron ore, and you are in Chhattisgarh, which has more coal, you could have a policy around coal. Someone would have a policy around iron ore. And I think that way, if you look at Orissa, because it's got abundant iron ore reserves, it has done exceedingly well on not only auctioning the iron ore blocks, but also ensuring that they get all the steel companies invest in the end use within their state. You look at all the steel companies today in India, whether it is Tata Steel, JSW, SAIL, JSPL, SR Steel, ArcelorMittal, everyone is there in Orissa. So for them, iron ore based industry is the most important. And for them, a restriction on iron ore reserves to be given to each company does not make sense. Because if they say that I will not give you more than 10 square kilometer, how would you ensure that the people or the industry or the companies will invest X $million or billions of dollars to set up 12 million ton and 24 million tons of steel? Because there's no assurance of a iron ore.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere we need to look at this dichotomy and remove it from the system. That today, if you have gone into auctions, today you have got enough penalty points. If someone doesn't pass those stage gates, best is not to have these restrictions. You can actually say that I have no restrictions. If you are going to set up a 10 million ton steel plant for 50 years, how much is your iron ore requirement you take? It can't be area wise. It has to be quantum of the iron ore that you will need. For any kind of mining is done by the end user on the basis of the mineral that he will need. He will not do more, he will not do less. So it cannot be restrictions on areas. Maximum should be restriction on mineral. According to me, that should also not be there. Worldwide, we have seen not many countries do not have these restrictions. So I think these are some of the things which government should look at.
Right. And I think the restrictions on area can also work adversely in maximizing the mineral extraction. If you have a large mineral field, then if you only give small amounts of the field in pieces, you might miss out on some middle grounds of very useful reserves. That's very interesting. Thank you very much for that response. I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. So once again, thank you so much for your time and very insightful comments. It's very interesting to hear about the history of mining in India and specifically your experiences over the last 30 years and understanding the perspective of industry, your perspective on what can be done to improve the industry specifically. I think it's very, very valuable. So thank you so much, Mr. Chaudhary. Look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And I hope it was useful.
Very useful. Thank you so much once again.